Rather general question, an important question. What other forms of AI are there out there or in the near future will be out there or may be out there?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we know about ChatGPT. I even quoted that in my talk. And it's really hyped. I mean, everyone is talking about generative AI and that specific product. But AI has been around for a long time. So we have seen computers beating Kasparov in 1997. We have seen, image recognition algorithms. We can type in a search query into Google and it gives us images. So that's AI too. What I'm trying to say is that there is a lot more than ChatGPT around, and that technology has been around and is evolving, obviously, for a number of new use cases. And yes, generative AI is a big and great milestone, but we shouldn't be blindsided by just that.
May I ask a question in that regard, which I've been struggling with, and I think this was alluded to in some of the prior discussions. When you put something into ChatGPT, it's essentially you're making it public in some form, as I understand. So for a private company looking to use a large language model type system, well, I'll put in my view, in addition to Corvinus, I work at an international law firm, and I would love to be able to upload a contract that I received and have a system do an analysis of it. But right now I can't because it's non-public information. Are there routes to get past that? Because I would think for just the use of such systems in the private sector and elsewhere, that would be a big and very helpful leap. What did they used to call that? Like a killer app, right? Like Excel spreadsheets or something.
First of all, you are disclosing it to OpenAI and not to the general public. And they can do whatever they please with that information. But this is exactly why companies do their own LLM implementations. There are a number of those. So you can there are open source ones and as well as other commercial chatbots. But yeah, security concerns are one part of the reason people don't use it. And another thing is, copyright. Because ChatGPT, if you ask, if you prompt ChatGPT to write a program or create a program, that usually is under copyright. But what is the copyright for code generated by ChatGPT? And there is a number of hidden layers there.
Funnily enough, there is a pilot project done by the German Ministry of Justice, where they try to support judges in their daily work, especially in the civil law field. The subject matter is to be extracted from thousands and thousands of pages from lawyers' hand-ins, expertise, and. So for a judge, it's really, from time to time, a nightmare to go through all of this. And they are trying to extract the subject matter of the plea from the convolute of material that has been handed in. And it is exactly as you said. Of course, you need to have your own instance of a language model. Funnily enough, it does not necessarily need to be a large language model, since it's legal speech anyways. So there might be different ways of tackling it. But for the moment, the results are promising. So, of course, there is a blind group, there is a comparison group, and there is those who have and those who don't. And the extraction that is done by the machine is quite sufficient. So if that continues, it might really be a help for swamped judges who have to dig through tons of paperwork.
And of course, that means woe to be for the junior associates at law firms who used to do that type of work. Michelle, you wanted to add something there?
No, I was a law clerk, so I got to say, I wish, I wish I had that. I spent a lot of time in libraries and basements and dusty old law books, but yeah, would have loved to have had that capability when I was younger. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you, Michelle. Peter, what are the societal risk factors of large generative AI as well as other AI technology? How about that for a small, easy question?
Not as easy, I think. First of all, large models are privilege. Privilege of whom? Privilege of large companies, large entities who can spend the money to train a really large language model, and or not only language model, but so-called substantial or fundamental model. One thing was very important 2 years ago. I think exactly 2 years ago, when OpenAI's ChatGPT became obvious tool all over the world. ChatGPT and the creator OpenAI told the world that it was to think in large models. Before, only the small portion of the experts knew that if we can teach billion parametric neural models, it can change the world. Now, every venture capitalist understands this and willing to put money in such businesses. But this is still a privilege, can be turned off anytime, and it's a big risk. It's a big risk. It splits up the society in two classes. There will be people who can do serious things on their own mind and the knowledge in the books. And there will be people who can perform only with the help of such big models. And when it is turned off, then innovation, development, new products shut off immediately. This is one risk. And the other one is the disinformation. And I think we will be speaking about the disinformation further, so I don't want to go into that.
An analogy, granted, super simple, but people becoming so reliant on your basic handheld calculators that they kind of forget how to do the math in their heads. That's what you're talking about by turning it off and turning it on. Yep. Michelle, another easy question. What else do we need to do, should we do, to establish a roadmap for the responsible use of AI, and I'm going to say worldwide?
Yeah, looking at it from a 90,000-foot standpoint, so not looking at actual technologies, but from a strategic standpoint, I can think of four general things. First of all, there's been a lot of discussion since last year, this concept of duty of care. And it sounds like a lawyer's term. I think it is actually, but it's basically applying not as a regulation or as a law, as a rule per se, but almost like a common sense or a human agreement that we will take all good care that how we interact with these AI platforms will be in a responsible and ethical manner. And this is something that is applied to the service providers as well. So, for example, OpenAI has said that, okay, we will apply this, but there is no force of law behind it. But it is something that I think as they discuss it more, they will probably put it into regulations. That's one thing that we are looking for come 2025. The second thing is establishing internationally accepted guidelines and guardrails. Now, these are more regulations or laws or rules that are passed by countries or, for example, the EU passed last year the AI Act, which was enforced this year. And this EU Act is probably, I think, arguably the most comprehensive legal or comprehensive regulation roadmap of regulations for AI in the world. Right after the EU passed this last year, President Biden said, "Okay, we're going to do something," and Congress couldn't agree on anything, not surprisingly. But he said, "So we'll do an executive order." So basically, he did an executive order that applied the same kind of regulations, very similar to what the EU was doing with their AU Act. But the difference is that an executive order in the U.S. only applies to the federal government, so it doesn't even apply to the commercial companies. So it's something versus nothing, but it doesn't have much application in the commercial world in the U.S. So we are looking to take something like what the EU has passed and have this in the U.S. And Elon Musk is the one that said, "Let's do guidelines and guardrails." And I'd like to know more about what he meant by that. I wish he'd talk more about it. Most people know he was one of the founders of OpenAI, and so he has he does have a lot of perspectives on AI that I think he's keeping to himself right now. I think he's a little busy with other things, but I like that guardrails and guidelines. If every country, if all regulatory bodies can look at that more seriously, how can we responsibly and ethically apply duty of care? And then finally, a big hot thing now is building AI factories, right? So before you have data centers, and then we have now more called next generation data centers, which are not storage, data storage facilities, but they are data processing centers. And these are processing AI. The problem is that these centers require so much power because of the processing, 24/7, and the speeds and heats that it emanates requires something different in these next generation data centers. So, for example, Microsoft, one of the largest cloud providers, right? They bought one of the nuclear reactors at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, which 3 Mile Island, I don't know if you know, is probably the worst nuclear spill in U.S. history. And Microsoft bought Unit 1. That reactor is going to be reconfigured to provide power, and it'll be exclusively for the use of Microsoft for their AI processing. And then in addition to that, because not everyone can buy nuclear power plants, they're just hanging around, not being used, there is a big shift, a big move now to develop small modular reactors, SMRs. So these, as the name implies, they're small, they're easy to put together, and they provide clean energy and the kind of processing power that AI needs. So expect to see more and more of these. I think it's key, and it's going to be, I think you're going to see them around Europe and the US more and more. And that, again, that's what we call an AI factory. Would have this latest technology like the SMRs, and also you've got a workforce, a skilled workforce working at these AI factories that will provide probably some of the highest quality AI services. So those are the 4 main things I can think of right now.
Just a couple. Thank you so much. A couple observations on what you said. In terms of the non-carbon generating energy requirements, I saw a statistic that within 2 years, the systems that are needed to power the AI in the U.S. Would constitute about 6% of the U.S.'s entire energy requirements. And also something like using 3 Mile Island. It's interesting because in some regions of the world, I think in Finland, the AI servers and systems that are needed, it's about 97% green non-carbon energy, whereas in Asia, it's only something like 16 to 18% non-carbon energy. And on this potential roadmap, as I'm sure you're aware, the Council of Europe just completed an AI treaty. It's called AI, Democracy, Rule of Law, but the initial focus was and it is primarily AI. It's been signed by the U.S., but to be clear, that doesn't mean it's been ratified by the U.S. And good luck getting 2/3 of the Senate to agree on pretty much anything. I think you would agree, let alone a treaty like this one. But at least it's out there for people to look at as well, and that may provide some additional thought and opportunities. I'd like to turn to Herr Dr. Bernhardt for your observations on my question to you. I just have a note here that says open. So talk about anything you want in terms of what we've been dealing with.
Well, first of all, it's not Dr. Bernhardt, it's just Mr. Bernhardt. So
all right.
thank you very much for giving me
Herr Bernhardt.
giving me that promotion.
Okay.
Thank you loads.
All right.
Now, the first thing that comes to mind is about the SMRs. I've read a lovely article about what changes that could bring to the thoughts of nuclear energy overall. Because most of the countries who were using atomic power plants had a double strategy. So on the one hand side, it was the energy. On the other hand side, it came in handy that the waste products were weaponizable.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and of course, numerous countries were betting on that kind of energy and production, which unfortunately has, besides of the weaponry, dramatic effects on the environment, because the toxic waste that is created needs to go somewhere. There needs to be strategies in order to work with that. Funnily enough, it was the Germans after the war who tried to define a way of non-weaponizable reactors. It's the so-called cold water reactors. So most of the traditional energy is, or the reactor types, are with liquid metals because they have to withstand the very hot temperatures. The Germans tried to do that with water and were successful until Angela Merkel said, nah, why would we? And but it is in discussion to revive that thought in order to have a peaceful meaning to nuclear energy and power, as you righteously said, power that massive demand of energy. And to me, for the moment, what I'm reading and what I'm understanding, this is two flies with one stone. And it sounds really exciting.
May I just make an? I guess I'm maybe not quite as upbeat on these small modular reactors as you guys are. In principle, they sound, this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But and the concept that you kind of build them somewhere else in modules, you ship them over and assemble them.
Yeah, they're prefabricated.
There's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem because Romania is looking very carefully at this. They've identified a site, a former kind of coal mine area. Hungary's looking closely, Poland's looking closely, but sort of nobody wants to be first. And that cost of the first one, you're not going to get those economies of scale as much. So it's definitely exciting, but it's been exciting for a couple of years now. And to my knowledge, nobody has taken the plunge except for maybe some stuff going on in Russia. But maybe, Peter, come back to you for a bit. In terms of AI applications, what types of AI applications should be considered when thinking about, referring to the title of our panel, care and feeding?
It's also a quite interesting question, and Balázs already mentioned the wide diversity of AI applications. Currently, we are facing the word of big AI and small AI, actually, and considering feed and care, I think we do not have too much work about small AI, because mostly small AI applications, small models, are solving particular problems in IT services, in industrial robotics, etc. in cybersecurity, but they are stepping forward to the truly large models. But what are really needs legislation, really needs thinking about how to fight against the usage in disinformation campaigns, for example, are the huge models, the foundation models that can create Viktor Orban speaking whatever, or other persons. But this has some actuality in the Hungarian media and politics right now. And this is the future. Now, who has eyes can recognize the deep fake stuff with a good accuracy. But I'm 100% sure that I myself in 2-3 years cannot make the difference between the deep fake and the reality. So we have to figure out how to sign the real stuff, or how to handle this whole thing, because otherwise the controllers, the privilege, who can manage these large models to make good disinformation campaigns, or who can pay for that, has the rule. Ridiculous.
And thank you. And coming back to disinformation, Michelle, I know you would like to talk about this, but it was remarked that I think the first reference to artificial intelligence was 1956 at a Dartmouth conference. But even before that, in 1950, Alan Turing of ultra-secret Enigma code fame, in 1950, he wrote an article called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, where he set forth what has now become known as the Turing test, where in a nutshell, you put a person in one room, you put a machine, let's call it a computer, in another, and then there's a questioner. Questioner doesn't know which is the person, which is the machine, and ask questions of both to try to determine which is which. And the amazing thing is, back in 1950, as just remarkably prescient, he said that by the year 2000, a questioner would only have about a 70% chance of knowing which was the human and which was the computer after 10 minutes of questioning. In 1950, he said that that's going to be the case in 2000. I mean, boy, was he was close. I mean, you know, now when I'm chatting, I always ask, are you human or not? Because I figure they probably shouldn't lie if it's not human. But Michelle, I know you wanted to comment on this issue as well.
Well, I just think that I think we need to take a step back, and we need to look at, like, how can we do this better? I don't know how else to really say it. I'm thinking it's been said very, very nicely by my colleagues here. I think I can't really add any more at this moment.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Balázs, can I come back to something was discussed earlier in the day, and these questions of transparency and human oversight. So if you have a machine learning system, so I'm sure all of you know, and many in the audience know, I've probably heard of AlphaGo Zero, which defeated the Go world champion, I think already in 2016, 4 games to 1. The human did win 1 game, but there was a specific move in game 2 that the AlphaGo Zero of DeepMind fame, of Google fame made, move 37, that experts said no human being would ever have thought of this move in a million years. So how do you get transparency? How do you get understanding of how the system, and therefore how do you get human oversight of a system that could make a move 37 type step that the experts were saying no human being ever would have thought of?
Yeah, well, some of these models can be transparent, but the ones we are looking at, so LLMs, those can't, so you don't understand them. You just train them and you expect the result. It's very difficult to articulate what they are doing exactly and why. If you ask the same question 2 times, they will answer differently. So I mean, we are talking about co-pilots and we are talking about AI assistants and we are talking about AI agents. So everyone feels that some form of supervision is required. I don't know how long we can be that supervision. I mean, it's just imagine, I mean, GPS was your example when we were chatting before the panel. Are we going to question?
Yeah, no, and then so, you know, the EU AI Act, it requires of the high risk AI human oversight. But what does that mean? How do you actually do that? Johannes, please.
Well, I think that is one of the crucial questions the AI Act is dealing with. And to make life even a bit more complicated, they're asking you to reason about the dangers of what you're about to develop. So that is a sort of Schrödinger's cat. I don't know what it's doing. Could be alive, but it could be dead as well. So I personally am failing completely from an intellectual perspective to answer that question. The funny thing is that I was participating in a few sessions at the European Union panel asking the lawmakers, how exactly do you envision that to happen? Same answer than mine. So I believe the question is far more, am I willing to accept that a law may be imperfect, but expresses a will to have oversight, even if there is an obvious logical flaw in it, which happily can be adapted to as soon as we find reasonable ways to supervise AI, to have standards in place that we can agree on from an academic perspective on the one hand side, but from an industrial and security perspective as well. And I believe that is the task in front of us for the next year, to give life to that. But still, that sentence in the AI Act, I get the goosebumps anytime I stumble over it.
Maybe I'll ask Peter another easy question. But first, may I ask in terms of timing, how much time we have left? Because I did not. 2 minutes? Oh, all right. Okay. Questions? Any questions that we have? If not, I will ask one last question. Yes, please.
How close are we to singularity? And if we approach it, then we won't be able to have human oversight of computer systems.
You want to go ahead?
If you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
This is a super question. Because at the very moment, we have a limited number of definitions for the singularity. And the set of answers that at least I do know, maybe you know more about it, is that in the multiplicity of times the event could happen, it requires some sort of consciousness for a majority of machines to come to decisions that would harm their inventors or humanity. It is possible, nevertheless, but the question is, how does the machine derive at a decision that would do that harm? And with that, funnily enough, we had that discussion over in the technical forum. I think that from a sheer technical perspective, we're talking about bias. We're talking about a machine misunderstanding a question, a problem, or a set of variables that it is presented with. And with that, you're exactly at the point that you mentioned already, that as soon as we understand the mechanisms of bias, that's the first thing. And I didn't. There is so much work to do still. That's the first thing. The second thing is to indeedly develop a set of standards that we humans allow machines to set the guardrails and guidelines in order to act within. And these will differ from a medical sector, a pharmaceutical sector, to space travel or to defense. And it's not done yet, but I'm pretty sure that we will very soon come to the establishment of formulations like these, especially to come around, to wrap our heads around the regulations of the AI Act, because we need to fill it with life. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, just one thing. Singularity is also called artificial superintelligence. It's when a computer actually is thinking for itself at a higher level than what a human can do. Obviously, it doesn't exist now, but so much didn't exist 20 years ago, and that we take for granted now. Like my colleague said, this is a supercomputer in your hand today. So 20 years from now, this artificial superintelligence will say, I just can't see that it's happening. It could very well happen. Science fiction is here.
Do we have time for one more question? Yes, thank you.
I have a question for you, Balazs. In your presentation, you talk about a couple of enterprise pain points, the data swamps and auto-archival. What is your main focus in terms of going to enterprises with your platform?
Enterprises were building these security monitoring processes for 10, 15, 20 years now. And they fell into these traps. They have the data swamps, and it's becoming very expensive. So one key challenge for them is to keep doing whatever they do today that they built for 20 years, but trying to get control of costs. That's their initial important step to do. So that's their motivation for change right now. So that's where we begin, and obviously our mission is to improve the swamp in a way that it becomes actually usable.
If you're using the swamps to drive your AI programs, you're only letting AI hallucinate even more. Is that?
Yeah. So the data quality, at least in the security data silos, are not good enough for AI. That's my conclusion.
And I think on that note, unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. I'm sure the panelists will be available during the break and later for any other discussions that we could have, and I'm sure we would all enjoy them. Please join me in thanking our panel for this discussion.